Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to join us for this informative webinar on virtual desktop infrastructure solutions. Before I pass you over to my colleague Alex, who will be running the session, I'd briefly like to tell you a little bit about CMS so you get a flavour of who we are and what we can offer. CMS Group is an IT infrastructure, cloud services and IT support company that has been established for over 24 years. As such, we've been able to provide our customers with a complete strategic wraparound of their IT services, ensuring that IT goals now and in the future are delivered efficiently and cost effectively. We offer nationwide coverage from our offices in Blackburn, Manchester and London, with our longest running relationship spanning in excess of 20 years, which highlights CMS's ongoing commitment and dedication to delivering strategic value add to IT services in an ever-changing IT environment. We have vast experience in delivering virtual desktop infrastructure for both our clients and also internally, as we utilise a VDI environment here at CMS, hosted from our core infrastructure at our data centre. We've had many requests from our current and prospective clients who are wishing to discuss potential VDI projects and are unsure which technology may work best within their environment. On the back of this, Alex Thompson, Head of Professional Services here at CMS, has performed a number of real-world and benchmark tests to identify how these technologies perform in certain scenarios. As this is a pretty detailed presentation, due to the amount of content we will need to cover in such a short space of time, if you could either hold any questions until the end or send over questions via the chat function, we'll do our best to read out and answer what we can given the time remaining. My contact details are also listed at the end of the webinar should you wish to discuss this in more detail. Thanks again for attending, and then I'll pass you over to my colleague Alex.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, so a little introduction about myself. I'm Alex Thompson, Head of Professional Services here. My job role at CMS is to lead R&D for the company and also run a team of consultants who are well versed in core IT systems and technologies which are used to add value and cost savings to new and existing clients. This is achieved with a healthy ethos of in-house people development and a good company strategy. This can be seen with a wealth of customer case studies which can be found on our website. So today we're going to be looking at some VDI solution comparisons and finding out which one is the best for you and your business. So, welcome along. Key aim for the webinar, give some insight into what the best suiting VDI deployment is for your business. This is going to be achieved with understanding business drivers for VDI, overcoming some selection and architectural challenges, some live and pre-recorded product demonstrations, some in-depth benchmarking of each client connectivity endpoints to each VDI solution, a bit of a SWOT analysis for you, total cost of ownership analysis, finishing up with a conclusion and a Q&A session. So this slide is for the benefit of anyone who's new to the concept of virtualization and virtual desktop environments. So just from some wiki articles, a hypervisor is software, firmware or hardware that creates and runs virtual machines. Each virtual machine is called a guest. The hypervisor presents the guest operating system with a virtual operating platform and manages the execution of the guest operating systems. Multiple instances of a variety of operating systems may share the virtualized hardware resources. I'll look a bit about VDI for you now. Desktop virtualization is the ability to provide comprehensive desktop environment to end users. All of the components of the desktop are virtualized and centralized, which allows for highly flexible and secure desktop delivery model. For example, if a user device or hardware is lost, the restore is much more straightforward as the entire desktop would be present from login from another device. In addition, because there's no data saved to the end user device, if that device is lost, there's less chance that the critical data can be retrieved and compromised. This also makes for a lot more cost-effective solution to maintain, as endpoints essentially become dumb terminals. So there are many vendors offering VDI in the marketplace. We've taken 4 key vendors alongside their associated hypervisor to test. I'm going to be looking at Redhat plus Redhat Enterprise Virtualization. I'm going to be looking at Citrix Zen Server with Zen Desktop. Also going to be looking at Microsoft Hyper-V with RDS pooled desktops. And finally, VMware ESX with Horizon View. Also, there are multiple endpoint users and devices to deploy to. We've taken a choice of a Mac, a Windows machine, a Qbox, an Android device, an IGL thin client, an iOS device, a Wise X50M thin client. So, some of the reasons to deploy VDI today. Providing you with centralized management and control, reduction of support costs and ongoing maintenance, ideal for centralized private or public cloud implementations, great for when you want to move to an operational expenses model where you pay for what you use, reduction on storage costs, and ease of DR and backup, so only back up the gold templates in a non-persistent deployment. Moving on to some selection and architecture challenges. So these are some questions that anyone deploying a VDI solution should be asking. CMS hope to be able to provide some insight into these questions today. So there are multiple different hypervisors, which one suits the business best? Which VDI solution fits my hypervisor the best, and what are my options? How are my desktops and applications going to perform? Can remote and mobile workers perform effectively? Which endpoint suits which architecture solution? And what is the skill set required to deploy, support, and perform ongoing maintenance? So we've designed a series of tests and benchmarks to address these concerns and frequently asked questions, of which we're going to be doing on our testing and platform environment, which consists of an IBM PureFlex Enterprise chassis. Within that space we have a V7000 storage device, which in turn manages a DCS 3700 storage device from IBM. We're going to be running on our tier 4 storage, so our slowest storage at the moment, which is on 7.2K nearline SAS 3 terabyte volumes. We have two 8 gigabit fiber channel switches in the rack. We also have two 10 gigabit Ethernet switches. So 4 fabric paths to the storage from the blade that we're going to be testing on today, and 2 Ethernet paths in active passive mode from the blade. And all the testing is done from a remote office over a 10 megalease line with an IPsec VPN. So we've used an IBM X240 blade node containing 2 Intel Sandy Bridge processors at 2.9 GHz with 8 cores per socket and a total of 32 threads, 256 gigabytes of memory. So the methodology then. So to determine the difference between hypervisor and associated VDI offerings, we adopted a standard testing for each architecture, and each were deployed in a vanilla state with no detailed configuration work, so a very much out-of-the-box experience. Each virtual machine guest was set with 4 gigabytes of RAM and 4 virtual CPUs. Each machine was set up with a 40 gig disk, which was thick provision lazy zeroed. Benchmarks were measured using Nova Bench inside the VM guest. We also looked at the reboot time of a VM on each architecture, the maximum capacity of VM guests inside each hypervisor, the time taken to boot 60 VM guests that are 100% CPU loaded inside all VMs. I'll talk a little bit about why we're doing that later on. We looked at the time to write a 2 gigabyte file in megabytes per second, and we tracked the time of how long it took us to install each solution. Looking at the endpoint testing methodology to determine difference between endpoints, each was used with each architecture where possible. So a time limit of 60 minutes was placed on attempting connection of the particular endpoint to the VDI solution. And the criteria here, we looked at streaming a 720p YouTube video. We gave it marks from 1 to 10, with 1 being poor and 10 being excellent. We looked at the overall speed and performance of the desktops, again marks from 1 to 10. And then we looked at important things like, does the client pull sound through, will the USB devices pull through, and will the onboard webcam pass through to the session. Also looked at how many steps it takes to launch, and are there any quirks? If so, what are these quirks? And then the above is all added together for a final score per endpoint and per VDI solution. So let's have a quick look at the architecture then. We'll start off with Redhat. The hypervisor is running from the X240 node. We have one Redhat Enterprise Virtualization Management machine, which is separate from the hypervisor. We're going to take a look at some pros and cons here as well. It did take a long time to install and configure correctly, where we had to edit default bonding configuration manually in config files for the network. There were no out-of-box features to add power management or user integration into the VDI deployment. No automated provisioning features. The documentation was okay, but convoluted in parts. You do have to register each system against the Red Hat network for it to be able to update and operate properly. And there is a drawback of having to have a physical Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization Management node. Some strengths then. There are extra features to tie in with Active Directory or Red Hat Directory to give delegated access to manually generated machines. The IBM Flex that we were testing on and all the blades fully support Red Hat deployments. Storage multipathing was supported and worked out of the box. No Windows domain was required. Monitoring worked out of the box, so this was very good. Emails were sent automatically to account holders after registering with Red Hat Directory online, detailing security updates and health of the systems in general. The only solution currently that offers VDI for Linux guest delivery. So moving on to Citrix Zen Server and Zen Desktop. Again, the hypervisor is running on the X240 node with one domain controller, one licensing, delivery and storefront or web interface server. Pros and cons. You can't change the management network VLAN. Cannot add VLAN tagging to the management network, so you have to change the switch port PVID or the native VLAN in IBM or Cisco speak. Storage multipathing was not supported out of the box, so we had to remove all the paths but one from the system, perform the installation and then enable multipathing from the central console before reinstating all storage paths. And a Windows domain is required for VDI. Some strengths of this solution: very quick install and provisioning. Automated provisioning features were the best of breed for all the VDI solutions, with single-click deployments of VDI from gold images. No sysprep is required, it's all done for you behind the scenes. And we found it was the best endpoint compatibility support. The best performance desktop also, and we have the ability to integrate this VDI solution with other major hypervisors for provisioning, and I'll talk a little bit about that again later on. So moving on to Hyper-V and RDS desktops here. Hypervisor again on the X240 node. One physical domain controller, one remote desktop web access gateway, one remote desktop licensing server, and one remote desktop connection broker, all from the same server. Pros and cons. So, complex installation procedure here. It does require a physical domain controller outside of the virtualized environment. Slow storage I/O and hypervisor performance. Low endpoint support. Streaming protocols we found as unrefined, slow and buggy. Some strengths: if you're using a Microsoft endpoint with software assurance, you do not need the VDA license to access the virtual desktop, and all required software is included within the server operating system. Moving on to VMware vCenter with Horizon View. Again, hypervisor on the X240 node. There was one vCenter server, VMware Composer, SQL Express, one VMware Connection Center, one domain controller, and one connection events server database. Some pros and cons. Quite a complex installation procedure. Provisioning is complex and does not fail if there's a configuration error. Instead, it will spin desktops up with domain trust relationship issues. If this happens, there are multiple registry entries necessary when the provisioning fails to resolve. And it is the most complex and controversial licensing methodology. Lots of overhead for virtual machines, as you can see, required for provisioning and logs, etc. Some strengths here: very good performance on virtual desktop, ties in well with VMware being a VMware product, and it is the market-leading hypervisor. So when we performed the poll at this point in the live webinar, the results that were achieved were VMware as a preference and performance came out at 44%, Hyper-V at 6%, Citrix at 44%, and Red Hat at 6%. Moving on then to looking at the actual hypervisor performance and versus videos. So the following video has been sped up due to the process taking over 11 minutes, and there's been a counter placed at the bottom right of the video to show the actual time taken. So I'll explain what's going on here while we're watching. The start of the video has been keyed to the frame where start has been clicked to spin up 60 virtual machines on every possible hypervisor here. The slide is simulating a boot storm. If you imagine it's 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, all of the users arrive in the office and try logging in simultaneously to their desktops and expect them to be available instantaneously. Citrix, Vmware and Microsoft do have the ability to make a percentage of these machines pre-staged up and ready for the user. However, this test simulates the absolute worst case scenario of all machines being powered down and all of the users immediately logging in, performing tasks that will consume 100% of the CPU guessed within that virtual machine. So you can see there that Hyper-V was first out of the blocks there at 1 minute 51 to spin those machines up. However, it did fail to spin 3 of the machines up due to maximum RAM usage on the hypervisor itself. VMware coming in second there at 5 minutes 17. Successfully brought all of the machines up, however, it was maximum CPU and maximum RAM loaded. Significant differences here in different hypervisors. Found that during the Hyper-V testing the CPU wasn't touched very much, and with the others the hypervisor did suffer from CPU load, full load. So Redhat Enterprise Virtualization finishing there in third at 6 minutes 29. Did fail to bring one machine up due to maximum CPU load. Now you can see there Zen actually timed out to the console there as the server stopped responding. All the machines stayed up, however the console access was interrupted. So eventually Zen server will catch up, and we're between sort of 9 and 11 minutes there. It didn't fail to bring any machines up, but was heavily maximum CPU and maximum RAM saturation on the server. So if we look at the reboot time for each of these solutions, again it's been keyed to the point where I press restart on each solution. Obviously at some point you're going to need to reboot a VDI machine, either as a user or an admin, and you'd expect these machines to come back and ready as soon as possible. So there we have VMware up in the pole position at 16.1 seconds. With Hyper-V coming second at 23.2 seconds. Redhat next at 30 seconds. And Citrix Zen server eventually will catch up again. Logging in any minute. Okay, so finally there at 51.2 seconds with Zen server. Okay, next we'll have a look at the 2 GB file gen video. So performed with an identical Windows 7 guest on each hypervisor, the spec being 4 GB of RAM and 4 vCPUs, and the tool we used was a free tool called RDFC, or Random Data File Creator, which generates a 2 GB file on each, and we observe the results. So again, file transfer generation is going to be necessary in any environment. This test shows which solution performs best. Again, start of the video has been keyed to the frame where the solution is starting to generate a 2 GB file. So immediately there we can see VMware speeding away. And coming in first position with 81.92 megabytes a second, Redhat close behind at 73.14 megabytes per second. For dramatic effect, I've left the video as it is. I've not sped this up, just to show the actual differences between. May come as quite a shock to some of you with a difference in performance. We were expected to see some difference in these test results, however the gaps in the performance here are quite large. So it looks like we're going to have Zen server finishing next. Okay, so 27.68 megabytes per second for Zen server, and Hyper-V bringing up the rear with 23.5 megabytes per second. So let's just have a recap and have a look at the results here. When we're talking about NovaBench, now NovaBench tests common components of a machine, and these tests will include RAM, CPU, graphics and hard drive speed. After that, an average is taken of these scores for final points. In this instance, these tests indicate the performance of the virtual hardware in each hypervisor. Moving on to maximum VM capacity. As you can see from the graph, VMware comes top with the amount of virtual machines that can be run once fully loaded. This means you can have up to 8 more users on the same hardware than Hyper-V. Okay, time to boot these 60 machines. Here's the test we've just seen, simulating boot storming. RDS coming in first there, with Citrix coming in last. 2 GB write time of the file. And finally, the reboot time. Fairly self-explanatory there. Okay, so let's have a look at the other side of this now. So each client device was tested where possible on each hypervisor. As previously stated, time limit of 60 minutes was placed. Where the time was exceeded or where the devices were incompatible, they were given a 0 score. The following shows 720p YouTube video being streamed to the thin client from each hypervisor and VDI solution. First off, we're going to have a look at the Windows client. So we've got Lenovo Ultra small form factor PC, the Core i3, 4 GB of RAM, 500 GB spinning disk, a dedicated GPU with Windows 7. Looks a little bit like that. So we have Citrix top left, Redhat top right, Hyper-V bottom left, and Vmware bottom right.
I was sent here for you from the future 50 years from now.
So it should give you an idea of how each performs.
In the beginning, the Sentinels were just targeting users, and they began targeting everyone. I've come a long way to guide us, to bring us together.
So a little bit jumpy there for all of the solutions.
I'm busy.
Next we'll move on to the Mac. We've got a MacBook Pro late 2013, Core i5 with 16 GB of RAM, 128 GB flash disk, dedicated GPU, and at the time of testing OS X 10.9.4. So again, the same layout. And the different hypervisors with the associated VDI solutions on there. So a pretty seamless experience from Citrix at top left there, I would say.
I was sent here for you from the future 50 years from now. Give one more time, please. Stay with me.
Fairly jerky from the rest. A little bit of a bug there with Redhat on full screen.
They began targeting everyone.
And then we move on to the iGel client. So we've got an IZ1 with a Cortex A8 1 GHz CPU, 1 GB of RAM, 2 GB flash disk, and 128 meg of graphics memory. Small form factor again. We're only able to connect this solution to, this endpoint to Citrix and Redhat hypervisor and VDI solution. Fairly jerky there, Citrix. However, a little bit better performing than the Redhat. Moving on to the keybox. Now this is a 50 quid device with a RMI MX6 quad processor, similar to what you get in your mobile phone these days. It has 2 GB of RAM with a micro SD card with the operating system installed on that, a GC2000 graphics card, and Arch Linux Homebrew for ARM processor. So you can see the size of the device there, it's really quite small. Should note at this point the screen is a little washed out, but this has nothing to do with the performance of the device. It's just the way that this particular video has been rendered. Fairly jerky performance. However, again, I'd say that Citrix was the better performing here. Okay, let's have a look at the iPad 3. Okay, so we were able to connect this to Citrix Citrix, Hyper-V and VMware. Fairly seamless performance there, I would say, from both Citrix and Hyper-V. VMware with a little bit of lag. So let's have a look at the Android client. We've got a Galaxy Note 2014 here. This works with all of the VDI solutions. Very big screen resolution on this device. Fairly jerky through all the testing. Now, as you can see there, the Citrix client has actually crashed. Can spin it up with the same session and recover the session, however it crashes soon afterwards as well. So moving on, let's have a look at the Wise X50M thin client. It has a 1.6 GHz dual-core processor with AMD, 2 GB of RAM, 2 GB of flash, dedicated GPU, and Wise Enhanced SUSE Linux Enterprise Desktop on here. Okay, so we could only connect this endpoint to Citrix and VMware. I think, again, fairly seamless performance here from Citrix. Tiny bit of tearing on this video. Very workable though. Not too bad performance with VMware either. Okay. Just as a little bonus here. Next video shows Redhat VDI capabilities of Rev with a VDI guest of Redhat. So while it's not really a multimedia platform, it's good to know that you can deliver to Android, Windows, iGel and Mac clients a Linux desktop. If I skip ahead a little bit here and show you that it is actually a Linux desktop in the background. Performance was pretty good as well. Okay, so let's just have a look at the test results. Where there are devices here with no scores, just to reiterate, this does not necessarily mean that they couldn't eventually be configured through third-party agents or protocol applications. However, they were not able to be connected and configured within our hard stop 60-minute time window. VirtViewer was the primary client here, used with Redhat to connect to the endpoints, with Opaque being used on the Android device and the native client on the iGel. So we were not able to connect to the iPad or the Wise X50M to the Redhat VDI solution. There were some quirks here as well. The launch screen resolution was incorrect on the iGel, However, log out and log in has resolved this. To launch the desktop from a Mac, you needed to issue a command line in the terminal due to permission and security settings. The best client device to use with Red Hat we found was the Agile device. Okay, Citrix here, lots of green across the board as you can see. All of the client devices were able to connect to the Citrix VDI solution. The WiseX50M actually gave the best user experience here. On the Android client, the Citrix receiver crashed, leading to an unstable user experience. Okay, on to Microsoft RDS. We were unable to connect this solution from the Qbox, the Agile, or the X50M. And surprisingly, Apple devices did give the best user experience with this deployment. There were a few bugs with full screen mode on the Mac client, however. Looking at VMware Horizon View next, we were unable to connect the Qbox or the Agile terminals to this deployment, and the Mac again gave the best user experience. Let's have a look at the collated results then here. So Citrix overall being the best performing VDI solution, based on the scores we've just seen. The Apple devices did work the best with the varying VDI solutions. Okay, moving on to a SWOT analysis. So we'll start with Red Hat, looking at the strengths. So it's the most cost-effective hypervisor in the marketplace. Good performance for storage and network I/O. There are more developers in the KVM hypervisor space than Xen, therefore greater potential for future deployment. And an opportunity to utilize a Linux VDI deployment here where no other commercial solution will offer this. Weaknesses: no automated provisioning features, no automated power management features, or support for Server 2012 or Windows 8. So lagging behind there, behind all the rest of the hypervisors who did provide support for those operating systems at time of testing. They're very new to the VDI market, so they're least mature, and it is built from open source code, but it is developed upon by the developers at Red Hat. Now they are Gartner Magic Quadrant bottom left as a niche player. Let's have a look at Hyper-V then. So Hyper-V is included as standard in the standard editions of Server 2012 RT upwards. Now Gartner Magic Quadrant top right sector leaders for hypervisor, and there are many developing enterprise features similar to VMware. So weaknesses here. Excuse me. There's a necessity for physical domain controller outside of the virtual environment, and a storage I/O is slow. So VMware, some strengths, Gartner Magic Quadrant technology leader, and an opportunity to use the market-leading hypervisor, whereby it is the most expensive hypervisor, and a very convoluted and controversial licensing model that goes along with that. Finally, Xen Server, very quick and easy installation, with the widest hypervisor support for their incumbent VDI solution. The largest endpoint compatibility natively, best performing desktops and multimedia, the ability to pass through dedicated graphics processors to virtual machines for increased multimedia performance, and Gartner Magic Quadrant top right sector for desktop application virtualization. They are slow. It was slowest to spin up 60 virtual machines under load, and the 10 gigabit virtual NIC was not available within the guest operating system. And we found a threat to be the hypervisor performance, which did tend to lag behind all of the other. So we ran another poll at this point and asked our viewers which they thought would cost the most. So with VMware View, 26%, RDS 21%, Xen Desktop 48% thought it would be the most expensive, and Red Hat VDI being 5%. Right, so moving on to the actual total cost of ownership. Licensing costs are based on a scenario we've utilised throughout this test. And the licenses for Red Hat are done per socket and per instance, so physical processor die in the server. Licenses for VMware were per gigabyte of RAM used, measured by a virtual appliance and submitted to your chosen licensing distributor on the SPLA model. Citrix is done per server, per installed instance of the hypervisor, and Hyper-V is per socket, again, physical processor die in the server. So calculations are for a 1 year total cost of ownership and the ability for 60 users to connect to each deployment. Expertise requirements have been indicated as a general recommendation of salary and additional business costs to have the necessary skill set to continually administer the deployment. However, this has not been included in the total cost calculation. The TCO for Redhat guest is low. However, the likelihood of the business requiring this type of scenario is low due to Microsoft application requirements of many businesses. So let's have a look at conclusion now. There are different use cases dependent on requirements. Therefore, the summaries have been broken down into sections based on best usage case for each technology. Following this presentation, I hope you'll be able to take on board everything that has been tested and be in a better place to make a selection based on your business requirements. So having a look at Redhat, it's great for non-Windows deployments. Simple licensing model, all features are included from one license cost. Lots of features available out of the box, so sound and USB pass-through. Good all-round hypervisor performance. Came second place in storage I/O tests. No secure remote access solution, although you will have to rely on firewalls or teleworker VPNs to provide this access for you. Now moving on to Citrix. So the best feature here, I believe, is the ability to choose your hypervisor to deploy to. We found the best case would be to use it with Vmware, as we do internally here. However, snippet top right there, you can connect it to Zen Server, Microsoft System Center, Virtual Machine Manager, vSphere, Citrix Cloud Platform, Amazon EC2, and Microsoft Configuration Manager. Okay, so it was the best all-round performance VDI solution. Did work on all the endpoints tested. It was the best at multimedia streaming. The easiest solution to administer with one-click deployment. It was the best scoring solution on our tests. The best mobile worker solution with the use of NetScaler, which can be used for secure load balanced remote access and VPN. So Microsoft RDS, the best solution for handling boot storms. Remote desktop gateway can be used for SSL remote access. Good for deployments where Hyper-V is used as the existing hypervisor, and there's no requirement for any additional install media. VMware was the best performing hypervisor all round, able to handle most amount of VMs concurrently, the ability to use your choice of access protocols, be it PCIP or RDS. However, controversial licensing methodology here. Okay, I'm just going to hand you back to Andy now, who's going to do the footnote for me on this webinar. So, hope you've enjoyed it. I'll hand you back.
That's great. Thank you very much for that presentation, Alex. I'm sure everyone found that very, very informative. Just a couple of things from me, just to finish off before I close the webinar session here. Just due to the file size of the presentation, unfortunately we won't be able to share this with you via email. However, if you'd like some more hands-on approach, we'd be happy to book in some time with you to enable a technical deep dive, hands-on installation, or even proof of concept for your organisation. As Alex has mentioned during the presentation, we do have many more videos of a particular test that Alex has carried out, showing items such as quality of webcam pass-through on various devices, Nova bench scores, processes to log in, steps to launch, USB pass-through, etc. So just due to the time constraints for the webinar session today, we couldn't incorporate all of these into the presentation. However, if anyone wants to see these specific tests, then by all means reach out to me at the contact details detailed on the screen now, and I'd be happy to obviously set this up for you. Additionally, if you do want any more information, please feel free to contact me on the phone number or email address provided. We're also going to publish this on-demand webinar on the website, as you can see from the URL on screen now. Thanks again for your time today, and thanks again for attending this on-demand webinar, and we look forward to working with you in the future.